بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome once again to another segment on our Quran series in the month of Ramadan. Continuing from where the author left off, Imam al-Nawawi mentions in his book At-Tibyan fi Adab Hamalat al-Quran, he quotes a hadith narrated by Aisha radiyallahu anha, and he says, وَأَنْ عَائِشَةَ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهَا قَالَتْ, and I think that's a hadith we've already mentioned, so we'll just move on to the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah. So وعن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يجمع بين الرجلين من قتلى أحد ثم يقول أيهما أكثر أخذا للقرآن فإذا أشير إلى أحدهما قدمه في اللحد رواه البخاري. So this hadith, which is narrated by Jabir ibn Abdullah, it's kind of a very important hadith, and it kind of gives us an indication as to how the Prophet ﷺ would honor the people of Quran and how much he would give them due consideration. So, as many of us are already well aware of, in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, in his biography, during the time in which he participated and the Muslims collectively in the Battle of Uhud, we all know the story and we all know what took place. And there were many people who were killed amongst the Muslims in the Muslim ranks on that day. So many of the biographers and many of the historians mention up to 70 Muslims were killed in the Battle of Uhud. And many of them were made shaheed. So the Prophet ﷺ, instead of digging up an individual grave for each and every person, what he would do is sometimes he would gather two or more people in one grave. And this is something which is permissible during times of affliction, like for example, if there's a lot of people who have passed away, or if there's not enough space for people to be buried. So this hadith mentions that the Prophet ﷺ, what he would do because of the circumstances related to Uhud, كان يجمع بين الرجلين من قتلى أحد, he would gather two people from those who've been martyred on the day of Uhud, and he would place them in one grave. ثم يقول, he would ask before each set of two people were buried, he would say, أيهما أكثر أخذ للقرآن, which out of these two people have more knowledge and have memorized more of Quran. So أخذ here is referring really to memory, so who have memorized more of the Quran out of these two. Then the hadith says, فإذا أشير إلى أحدهما, if one of them was indicated to him, so if one of the people was mentioned, so and so, Sahabi, he has memorized more Quran, knows more Quran than the other person, قدمه في اللحد, he would be the person who would be put in the grave, he would be placed in the grave first. And the hadith mentions al-lahd. Al-lahd is a type of grave, it's what you could describe as a Muslim grave, in which when you dig into the ground, you also have a subsection in which you dig further towards the side that's facing towards the Qibla. That's what's called a lahad. So he would be placed in the lahad first. Okay, the person who has more knowledge of Quran, and this was takrimatan li ahli al-Quran. It was a signal honoring the people who know Quran. And this hadith is an authentic hadith. It's mentioned and collected by Imam al-Bukhari in his authentic collection. So it kind of goes to show you that the Prophet ﷺ, even amongst the companions, there would be a level of distinction in which he ﷺ would give due recognition to those people whom he felt ﷺ was deserving of a high position because of how much they knew from Quran. So the Quran, obviously being the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is something that weighed heavy in the minds and the souls of the believers. Anybody who had understanding of Quran, anybody who knew the Quran, was given that due respect and that due honor. So this is something that we should all really aspire to. we should all want to learn more of Quran. We should all have the desire to kind of have a relationship with the Quran. We should have a daily schedule in recitation of Quran. There shouldn't really be a day that goes by except at least we've recited some portion of the Quran in whatever capacity our circumstances allow us. So for example, some people might not be able to recite much of the Quran. So what about reciting 1 page a day or reading 1 page of the Quran every day? Some people have memorized some sections or portions of Quran. So for that person, they would recite and they would revise a little bit more every single day. Then you have people who Allah has blessed to memorize the entire Quran. So those people have to have should have a regular schedule, okay, of revision in which they're always making sure that they do not forget the Quran, and they also recite the Quran constantly. So having that kind of relationship with the Quran, even if you don't know much of the Quran, just reading the Quran, there's so much blessing and there's so much barakah in just the recitation of Quran. So it's something which is something that's not really taken into much consideration today, and it's also a complaint that the Prophet ﷺ is going to make on the Day of Judgment. That's actually recorded in the Quran, where it's mentioned, وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا, in which he ﷺ will say on the Day of Judgment, "Oh Allah, my people have done hijrah from the Quran." So my people have left the Quran. People, it's not given the amount of respect, and admiration that it deserves. Whereas if you study the early generations, somebody who had knowledge of Quran or somebody who was connected to the Quran was recognized as being somebody who's worthy of respect. The Prophet ﷺ clearly in this hadith showing how much he admired and respected people who had knowledge of Quran, in which he would give them the honor of being the first to be placed, okay, in the grave that was demarcated for the people who are the shuhada in this case. So it's something that we should all aspire to. We should all try and learn more of the Quran. We should all try and establish our relationship with the Quran. It's something that we should try and do as much as possible. Sometimes people don't have time. Sometimes our circumstances in life might not allow us to do much. And do what you can. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ. In a hadith in Sahih Muslim, he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, مَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Okay, he said, whatever I've, any, injunctions that I've given you, or any commandments that I've given you, try and do of it as much as you can. So it's always on the condition that there is an ability to do so. So if there's that ability for somebody to do that, then they should. If they have the capacity to be able to do something, do as much as your capacity allows you. That's really what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah and have consciousness of Allah as much as you can. Do as much as you can and do the best that you can, but try and do something so that at least you can be categorized as being from the people of Quran. Okay, so that's something which is very important. Then the author, alayhi rahmatullah, he mentions another hadith, وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه, and this hadith was narrated and transmitted by Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him. عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the Messenger of Allah عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said, أن الله عز وجل قال, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. So he's referring to something that we classify as, or that is classified as a hadith Qudsi, okay, a divine hadith, okay, because the hadith in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is attributing a statement that was said by Allah, but at the same time isn't considered to be Quran. It's not categorized as Quran, nor does it hold the same rulings as the Quran. That's what we call hadith Qudsi, and it was transmitted in the way that a hadith were transmitted. So he mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, Man adali waliyan faqad adantuhu bil harb, Rawah al-Bukhari. In which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, anybody who shows animosity, or anybody who shows enmity and animosity to a wali of mine, to somebody who is an ally of mine, a wali of mine, somebody who is a righteous person, faqad adantuhu bil harb, I have declared war on this person. This is a hadith collected by Imam Bukhari. So the reason why Imam Nawawi places this hadith in this section is to indicate to us that a person who is connected to the Quran is by default somebody who is a wali of Allah. Somebody who's close to Allah is somebody who has knowledge of Quran. So in order to be a wali, a person has to have that relationship. But how do we establish a relationship with Allah without the Quran? It's the direct revelation. So can it be that a person can become close to Allah without having necessary knowledge or a necessary relationship with the Quran, with the revelation? It's very difficult to conceptualize that. So learning Quran and having a connection with the Quran is one of the easiest ways in which you can establish a good relationship with your Lord. And that's something which is very important, because by reciting the Quran, it has an impact on the soul. And the impact on the soul means that you are being cultivated, your heart is being cultivated, okay, to be much more right, in order to be much more righteous. Okay, and that's something that we all need. And that's part of the journey of purifying the soul. So, and Allah Azza wa Jalla, this hadith, مَنْ آذَانِ وَلِيًّا فَقَدْ آذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ. Anybody who shows enmity and animosity to somebody who is a wali of mine, okay, somebody who is an ally of mine, somebody who I give given high status, فَقَدْ آذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ. I have declared war with this person. And this is speaking about people who have knowledge of Allah. Because in order to be a wali is in order to have a knowledge of Allah and to have that special relationship and that bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Somebody who does good deeds and somebody who's a righteous person. Then the author says, وَثَبَتَ فِي الصَّحِيحَيْنِ, and it's something which has been established in the Sahihain, meaning in al-Bukhari and Muslim, عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, من صلى الصبح, whoever prays the Fajr prayer, فهو في ذمة الله, they are in, or they are under the protection of Allah. Okay, so من صلى الصبح, anybody who prays the Fajr prayer, فهو في ذمة الله, they are under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection. So they are under his special, it's a special and a privileged type of protection and guardianship. Then he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, فَلَا يَطْلُبَنَّكُمُ اللَّهُ بِشَيْءٍ مِّن ذِمَّتِهِ. Then do not be the target, do not be the recipient or the victim of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to check somebody because of the guardianship that he's provided for somebody else. So somebody who's been given that level of protection and privilege, do not be the one who goes against this person because he's under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guardianship. And this hadith is mentioned in Sahih Muslim, and it's also mentioned in Al-Bukhari. So anybody who prays Fajr, do not upset them. They pray Fajr and they've prayed their Fajr prayer, then be very wary, because this is a person who's under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine protection and under his divine guardianship. فَلَا يَطْلُبَنَّكُمُ اللَّهُ بِشَيْءٍ مِّن ذِمَّتِهِ. Do not then be the victim of being somebody who will be caught up in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting his protection to use. Okay? And then the author alayhi rahmatullah, he mentions and he says, and he transmits to us a statement that was made by two great Imams, and he says, وَعَنِ الْإِمَامَيْنِ الْجَلِيلَيْنِ, and on the authority of two of the most respected and greatest of the Imams, Abi Hanifata wa Shafi'i, and Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahumullah ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them. Qala, they both said, so this is a statement that's attributed to both Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam al-Shafi'i also. So they said, إِن لَمْ يَكُنِ الْعُلَمَاءُ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ وَلِيٌّ. He says, if the scholarly people, the learned people, are not Allah's awliya, if they're not considered to be Allah's awliya, then Allah doesn't have a wali. So that means our concept of awliya doesn't even exist. If the people who are scholarly and if the people of knowledge and the people who are learned are not, if they're not awliya, then no one is awliya. In other words, what it means is that the implicit meaning is that the ulama, people who have knowledge of Allah, they are Allah's awliya. And that's the reality. It's very important for us then to kind of realize that it doesn't really take much for us to be close to Allah. If we learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we put to practice that which we learn, and we keep this relationship kindled and established, then it means that we can also be from إِن لَمْ يَكُنِ الْعُلَمَاءُ أَوْلِيَاءَ. So they both said, إِن لَمْ يَكُنِ الْعُلَمَاءُ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ فَلَيْسَ لِلَّهِ وَلِيٌّ. If the scholarly people and the learned people are not considered and not categorized as such, then that categorization doesn't even exist. It's a very powerful statement. And this is collected, and you can read this. It was a statement that was collected by Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi in the book Al-Faqih wal-Mutafaqih. So he mentioned also, Imam al-Bayhaqi also mentioned this statement in his book Manaqib al-Shafi'i about the virtues of Imam al-Shafi'i. And they all, so there's many of the scholars who've transmitted these statements. Then the author, he gives us and he tells us and he transmits to us a statement made by one of the greatest scholars of the past, Al-Hafidh, who was a great master of hadith, Abu al-Qasim ibn Asakir. And in his other book, Imam Nawawi's other book called Bustan al-Arifin, he says that this person isn't only a master of hadith in his time, he is the master of hadith in all times. So he is the universal master of hadith. That's how Imam Nawawi refers to him in his book Bustan al-Arifin. So he says, وَقَالَ الْإِمَامِ, and the great Imam Al-Hafidh, master of hadith, Abu al-Qasim ibn Asakir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, this is a statement that was mentioned by Ibn Asakir, he said, اعلم يا أخي, have knowledge, O my brother, وفقنا الله وإياك لمرضاته. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and guide us to that which He is pleased with. وَجَعَلَنَا مِمَّنْ يَخْشَاهُ وَيَتَّقِيهِ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ. And may He make us amongst those people who have fear of Him and have consciousness of Him the way in which people should have consciousness of Him. Have knowledge that, so here's the main statement, أَنَّ لُحُومَ الْعُلَمَاءِ مَسْمُومَةٌ, that the flesh of the learned people, scholarly people, are poisonous. So he's telling us, backbiting and slandering people who are learned, that's like somebody eating or drinking poison. وَعَادَةُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي هَتْكِ أَسْتَارِ مُنْتَقِسِهِمْ مَعْلُومَةٌ. And the practice and the way in which Allah deals with those types of people who try to devalue or make deficient their status or try to humiliate them is very well known. وَأَنَّ مَنْ أَطْلَقَ لِسَانَهُ فِي الْعُلَمَاءِ بِالثَّلْبِ. And anybody who releases their tongue and is not really careful and makes their tongue unrestricted in the way in which they disparage the scholars by trying to humiliate them. Athalb is referring to aib, so a type of so trying to expose them, in other words, like trying to humiliate, in order to humiliate them. If anybody does that, the author Ibn Asakir is saying, ابتلاه الله تعالى قبل موته بموت القلب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring tribulation to this person before they pass away by causing their hearts to pass away. So their hearts will be caused to pass away. And then he mentioned the verse in the Quran, فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Then let them be aware, those people who contradict the commandments that was given by the Prophet ﷺ, lest they be put to trial, by giving a tribulation, or they are put to test by giving a painful punishment. So this is mentioned in the book Tabyin Kadhib al-Muftari Fima Nusiba ila al-Imam Abi al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, written by the scholar Ibn Asakir. So it's a very, very important statement, a very serious statement. speaking about the fact that nowadays the people who of Quran, this is who is being spoken about. That's the context that Imam Nawawi is mentioning, and as to why he put it in this section. So people of Quran, people who've learned Quran, they have a type of knowledge. And anybody who disparages people of knowledge and speaks ill of them and insults them and abuses them, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes those people and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he causes them to be put to trial, a type of tribulation that will only end up in which their souls become debased and their hearts dead. So it's something which is very, very serious. Do not ever, under any circumstances, speak ill of somebody who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed knowledge upon, or his grace. Don't speak ill of people. Just leave the people alone and save yourself, because we really haven't been guaranteed salvation in any way. So then leave the burden and the responsibility of talking about people or dealing with these kind of issues to people who are more knowledgeable or people who are authoritative. If they say something, it will be known. Leave it to those types of people. Don't be caught up in the qila wa qal, who said about who and who so-and-so said about so-and-so, especially when it's so attractive to get involved in, and it's so desirous. And it's kind of interesting because Imam al-Ghazali, he mentioned something very interesting in his book Ihya Ulumuddin, and he mentioned it in Kitab al-Ilm. He said that the quickest way for somebody to gain followers, and he called it istibta'. So he mentioned atba', literally he used the word atba', which means followers. It's kind of ironic because it's kind of interesting actually, because that's exactly what you call people on social media nowadays. People want followers. He said the only reason, if you ever see anybody wearing the cloak of religiosity, disparaging other people, insulting other people, talking about other people in an ill way, in an ill fashion, then know that this person is really trying to gain followers. Because that's what people are attracted to. People are attracted to controversy. People are attracted to, so-and-so attacked so-and-so. People like that kind of stuff. And it's a problem with the hearts. So he's saying that that's the quickest way for somebody to gain followers, to gain people, to gain supporters, is that when you start abusing other people and cursing and demonizing and speaking ill of people, slandering. That's the quickest way for somebody to gain followers. That's what he said. And he even narrated an athar in Kitab al-Ilm, in which two of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were walking, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and one of the other companions, and they saw a man who was abusing somebody else. Okay, so they saw a man who was abusing someone, and they said, هذا يقول اعرفوني. So they said, this person, he's attacking other people, but what he's really saying is, recognize me. اعرفوني. So in the actual reality, that's what the actual reality is. Despite the words being something different, the reality is this person is really trying to say, look at me, recognize me. So it's something which is very, very dangerous. Never ever get caught up in these kind of things, because it's a very, very dangerous place to go. And with that, inshallah, we conclude, and in the next segment, inshallah, we'll go on to the fourth chapter, which deals with the etiquettes of the teacher of the Quran and the student. So the teacher and the student. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi